Welcome to Your True Calling. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Dr. Michelle Chappell, a psychologist and a rock star. I've helped thousands of people find their true purpose by discovering their one-of-a-kind superpowers. Each week, I'll share tools and client success stories to help you find gifts you don't know you have so that you can thrive in a career that fills your soul and passion projects that make you feel whole. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be back in 2025, and I wanted to start the year out by tackling a big topic. According to mythologist Michael Meade, we are presently experiencing an apocalypse. Now, don't get too worried. He says the word apocalypse means lifting the veil so that we can see the hidden issues that need to be addressed. It's not the end of days. Dark times like these signal the beginning of a new death rebirth cycle. Although the times we live in now are unique, we can look back to history to see how we've made it through other dark times and thrived using our unique gifts, which is what this podcast is all about. So I am excited to bring back Dr. Diane Dreher, who is a best-selling author and positive psychology coach. She has a PhD in Renaissance English literature and also a master's degree in counseling. And we're going to talk about how we went from suffering in the Dark Ages to flourishing in the Renaissance, to give us hints and clues for how we can do the same thing in today's troubled world. Let's get into it. Hi, Diane. I'm so glad that you're back on my podcast. Thank you for being here.
I am just delighted to start the new year with you, Michelle.
Oh, me too. I mean, you have such a positive message for the world, and we need it right now because we are kind of living in dark times, I think. You put out several books, translated into 10 languages, and I just thought you would be a perfect guest for this podcast. If you haven't tuned in before, this podcast helps people find their unique talents and passions that they may not be aware of. And I've noticed that when my clients find their natural superpowers, they also find their purpose in the world. And you do very similar work in a slightly different way. So I thought we would talk about that and dig into one of your books in particular, Your Personal Renaissance. What do you think?
Great. I wrote this book a while ago, but I see it's really relevant now. The Renaissance in Western Europe was an amazing time, which, my PhD in English is in Renaissance literature from UCLA. So it's a time period that's inspired me for years. But what really amazed me is that people in the Renaissance were emerging from a major pandemic of the bubonic plague, which killed, countless numbers of people, upset their lives, made them fearful and anxious. And also, they were living under a lot of authoritarianism from the church, top-down leadership, from the government, kings, dukes, princes, the regular people really coming into the Renaissance didn't really have much of a sense of personal power.
Yes.
In fact, the Catholic Church told them that only priests, monks, and nuns had a special calling from God, and everybody else was here just to, fulfill what Maslow later called their deficiency needs, to work, to live, but not to do anything more significant than that. Well, within a generation, we have this incredible flourishing of the arts, the sciences, new definitions of leadership, philosophy, religion, everything. People started waking up. There was a rebirth of a sense of personal meaning, purpose, and power throughout Western Europe. What happened? Some people say the Renaissance was caused by a rediscovery of classical knowledge. Well, that was partly true. One scholar actually said that it was because of their diet. People started eating more beans and they had more protein, so they had more energy. Well, okay. I think it was because of a major redefinition of our sense of who we were as human beings. In the Middle Ages, uh, my medieval friends don't like to call Renaissance literature and history and all that the Renaissance. They call it the early modern period because they don't want to admit that there were absolutely centuries, about 1,000 years, in which people didn't have a sense of personal power. I mean, a few people did, obviously, but not the great majority. What happened was that theology and the arts started recognizing that each individual had something special to offer. The theologians of the Renaissance and Reformation taught that instead of just priests, monks, and nuns being given gifts by God, God had given every single individual a set of special gifts, and it was their duty and their destiny to discover them and to use them to serve their fellow human beings, to fulfill themselves as individuals, and to serve God. So guess what? Self-fulfilling prophecy. If people believe that they had special gifts, they started discovering them all over the place and learning, coming up with new insights, innovations in every field. And there's something interesting that's been happening today in positive psychology that Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson did a major study a number of years ago now of all the cultures in the world. And they found that there are 24 character strengths that are common to all humanity. However much we disagree, and we do, look at the news, on many things, we all agree that there are certain key strengths that we all admire. Spirituality, honesty, integrity, creativity, and that each person has 5 top strengths of the 24. We each have all 24, apparently, as human beings. But each person has 5 top strengths. And studies have shown now that when we discover them and use them, we're happier, healthier, and more successful. Using our strengths. I mean, that's what people believed back in the Renaissance. That's why Michelangelo, Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, etc., became the great creative people that they were. So I think that we're on the edge of a new Renaissance, having emerged from a pandemic and dealing with some people that somehow feel like we should accept top-down answers instead of look into our hearts for who we are and bring forward our own gifts. So we're in that period of dynamic change, which can come forth with all kinds of possibilities.
Thank you. Yay, that was beautiful. I love that. It's interesting that the Renaissance emerged from the Dark Ages, and we seem to be in troubled times too. I actually have a quote from your website, which I thought really captured it. We live in a world out of balance, filled with natural disasters, economic insecurity, political upheaval, and the escalating stress of daily life. I was thinking about it that we live in such a fast-paced world that many of us don't realize that we can stop and look back to our history to find solutions to problems that are similar to what we have now. People have faced dark times before. And that's why I thought it would be really interesting to talk to you about what you know about the Renaissance. But we're kind of coming full circle in a way, because we're going through these difficult times where we're feeling disempowered and scrambled, and a lot of people don't have the time, or they don't even realize that there are answers in our history. So I would love to maybe dig into one of these beautiful people that you write about, and maybe if you could tell us a story about how they came to discover who they were. So, and I would love listeners to just sort of think about yourself as you're hearing this story, because even though these people are famous, you too could go on a very, very similar path. We all can.
We're so overwhelmed by information, and information is not knowledge, because some of it is not true. And knowledge is not wisdom. So we need to seek the deeper wisdom. And we can find that by taking a pause turning off this onslaught of information that comes at us that tries to dictate who we are, who we need to be, what we need to believe. In the very, very early Renaissance, and you may have noticed medieval paintings in the church where people don't have a sense of proportion. You know, the Christ child is portrayed as just a very miniature adult human being. That there's babies' proportions are different from adults. But they didn't seem to know that. They didn't draw from life, and they didn't have a sense of perspective. So there's this flat background, and this was the way it looked, for centuries. It also looked that way scientifically. The Catholic Church taught that the Earth was the center of the universe. Guess what? Copernicus thought otherwise and conveniently died before the church could, go after him. Galileo looked up at the heavens with his telescope and found that, guess what? The sun is the center of our solar system. And yeah, okay. So instead of accepting outsiders, authority figures, dictates about what we should think and who we are, people in the Renaissance started experimenting, and they discovered their strengths, their gifts, in a way that a lot of us discover ours by playing as children, by discovering what we love to do. There was a little boy who was the son of farmers out watching his father's sheep in early Italy, hundreds of years ago. And little Giotto used to love drawing pictures. He'd draw in the dirt. He had no artistic tools because, of course, he came from a poor family. And he'd take a rock and he'd draw upon a big stone. And he was sketching a portrait of one of his father's sheep one day when the Florentine artist Cimabue came by on his way back to Florence, got off his horse and said, "Who drew that?" And the little boy said, "I did." He was about 10 years old. And Cimabue was so impressed, he said, "Would you like to become my apprentice?" Because he saw that the sheep was in proportion and looked like a real sheep. It wasn't some stick figure. Mm. So they went to ask his father's permission, and Giotto went back to Cimabue's studio, became his apprentice, his student. He obviously had a great sense of humor because he would draw from life, and his drawings were very realistic. Instead of drawing what authorities had said or copying other people's, he actually drew things that were real. He drew a fly one day on one of Cimabue's paintings when the master was out of the studio, and when Cimabue came back, he kept swatting the painting because he thought the fly was real. Realism, Renaissance realism. You see then later artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo studying the human body and drawing really wonderful proportions, this sense of dramatic realism that came into Renaissance art. And each artist had his or her own style, but the portrayal of our world was real. So little Cimabue, little Giotto rather, discovered his strengths by doing what he loved to do. And a lot of us, when we were children, before people told us what we should do, and we needed to be good children and do what we were told, we experimented, we reached out, we played. So if somebody loved to draw, loved to cook, loved to explore nature, in a number of things, loved music as a child, maybe that was a key to finding our gifts and to going back in time and saying, "Oh yeah, I have that. I have something special that I can bring forward," before my adult responsibilities came and just sort of suffocated it out of me. It's still in there someplace.
It's interesting listening to you talk because, as you know, I'm a real fan of Carl Jung. As children, we're very inner directed, and he talks about how we come into the world with a purpose, actually. Each of us has a unique purpose, and our reason for being here is to discover our gifts and to answer that calling. That's the way he looked at it. Around the end of World War II, another kind of dark time. And I'm just thinking, when we're children, we haven't had to learn all those rules yet. We haven't had to please our parents yet. We haven't gone to school yet and had a teacher told us that our drawing looks stupid. We haven't had a job where they don't value our particular slant on things. That hasn't happened yet, so they're free. And it sounds like with the Renaissance, these people who were discovering their gifts were having to shake off the way they were told to see things, the way they were told to do things. So part of discovering who you are, is it true? Let me ask you this. Part of discovering who you are is to be more inner directed than outer directed. Is that right? Would you say, or something like that?
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of contemplative practice in the Renaissance. Andrew Marvell wrote this beautiful poem called The Garden, where he'd just go out into the garden and feel like he was one with nature and become inspired. And we don't usually get inspired by reacting to the dictates of other people.
Right.
Okay, the opposite happens. We become, reduced. And very often people who mean well, protective parents can actually impede our growth. Michelangelo's father wanted his son to become a cloth merchant so he could bring money into the family and make a good living. And whenever he caught the little boy, Michelangelo, drawing pictures, he'd actually beat him. Don't do that. That's stupid. Nothing will ever come of that. He was trying to beat the creative gifts out of his son until finally a local artist noticed Michelangelo had talent, and the father finally gave up because there was no stopping the little boy. He loved to draw. He loved art. That's who he was. So fortunately for all of us, Michelangelo persisted, and we have the Sistine Chapel and the statue of David in the Pietà and all kinds of wonderful works of art, because he didn't give up on his gifts. Even when his family said, no, you need to be normal, you need to be conventional. Don't reach out for something creative.
Okay, dear listeners, I wanted to take a pause and check in with you. Diane is such a wealth of information and wisdom. Now let's talk about how you can apply it all. I'll include the link for the VIA Strengths survey she mentioned in the show notes, so you can find your top 5 out of 24 strengths. It's free. Now, it's true that early in life, you're aware of what your gifts are, because you haven't been conditioned to suppress them yet. But I've worked with a lot of clients who had rough childhoods and don't remember their early years so well. So I wanted to share a couple of other clues as well. One thing you can do is ask yourself what comes naturally to you. Now, I don't usually like to suggest that people compare themselves to others, because that can take you down a rabbit hole of self-doubt and self-deprecation that you just don't come back out of. We've all been there. I'm talking about something different here. If you can notice what comes easily to you that others struggle with, that's a sign of a true gift. For example, when I was studying psychology at Princeton, we had a speaker who gave us a test on music perception as part of our talk. I ended up scoring off the charts compared to other students, professors, and even a dean of the college who had studied classical violin for 20 years. Now, it wasn't that I was better than them, like in an ego kind of way. It was showing me that I had a natural gift for music I wasn't aware of. You see how it works? You can do that too. Another clue for identifying your inborn abilities is that you lose track of time and go into the zone when you use them. It's like you're in a flow state. You become one with whatever you're doing. And it's different for different people. For Diane, it's writing. For me, it's playing music. What is it for you? Another sign of a hidden superpower is that your friends ask you for advice about it. They often can see it when you can't. Now, these are 3 good clues if you can't remember what you loved to do as a child. What comes naturally to you? What makes you lose track of time? What do friends ask you for advice about? If you want to find out more, you can visit my website, powerofauthenticity.org, and you'll see 7 Empower questions right on the home page that can help you find your unique talents and abilities in specific fields. It's free. Now, I really do believe that we're not here by accident, that each of us is living in this moment in time for a reason. And I believe our mission is to find our individual superpowers and use them to improve the world. That's why I like superheroes so much. I don't really like the fighting part, to be honest, but I do like that they're trying to do good using their strengths. Villains also have superpowers, but they use them for selfish gain. Now, I'm sure most of you remember Chadwick Boseman, who was the star of the Black Panther, who passed away a few years ago. He had a beautiful quote I wanted to share with you. Purpose is an essential element of you. It is the reason you are on this planet at this particular time in history. Your very existence is wrapped up in the things you are here to fulfill. Now, according to Michael Meade, the mythologist that I opened up the podcast talking about, our environment and culture are breaking down at the same time, and it can be overwhelming. And watching the news about it all can be even more overwhelming. Many of my Gen Z and millennial clients aren't that hopeful about the future, but they do want to fight for it and be of service. They say that life is short and they want to find their purpose now before it's too late. So what can you do? You need to go inside yourself to find who you are instead of listening to other people telling you who you should be. Cut down the noise. Don't watch the news so much. Take some time off from social media and substitute that time for doing a creative project. I know it may seem super silly and unimportant to do something like that in a world that is so overwhelming right now, but it's a way to center yourself and discover your hidden gifts and to find your purpose. I'll give you an example. I once had a client named Jane who was burned out at work, and she wanted to find better work-life balance, and she thought a good way to do that might be engaging in a creative project. So she thought that she would try to write like her father, who was a writer, but it came in fits and starts, and honestly, she wasn't happy doing it. So I asked her to experiment doing different things, and it took a few weeks for her to explore what else she could do. And she told me one day when she was taking a walk, she had an aha moment where she thought, I should buy some paints and paintbrushes. Long story short, she came home and started painting and never stopped. Her husband would keep her dinner warm while she painted in their attic at night because time would disappear and her dinners would get cold. Remember? That's one of the signs of finding a true gift. There are other benefits from having a creative project after work. Research from San Francisco State University shows that people who have a hobby do better at work, get promoted more, and are better team players. And it replenishes your energy so that you come back to the workday with some zest in your heart. It can also help you find new gifts and point you in a new direction in life. But when you find your superpowers, no pressure on making the world a better place with them. Often just by virtue of being your true self, you give other people permission to be authentic too. And that already makes the world a better place. And your gift doesn't have to be big or astounding. It can be that you're a good organizer, you're a good listener, you're a good team player. It all counts. And be kind to yourself during this process of self-discovery. Don't push yourself to change, just let it happen. Clear some space in your busy schedule for some me time. As psychologist Carl Rogers says, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Remember, you were born with these gifts. You already have them. It's just a matter of reclaiming them. Next, Diane and I are going to talk about how you can find your hidden gifts and talents by being seen by others and joining communities. Let's go.
And both of your examples, these two young artists were seen by an older artist, which helped them. And, one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast is because I want listeners to know that there are people who exist who see your gifts, and seeking them out can help you, I guess, develop the backbone to really go after them. And I know that you've talked about this in your world too. Do you want to say anything about that?
I think it's really important to have mentors, to have people who can see us, because a lot of times people don't see us. Our gifts, our strengths, our creativity may actually threaten them, and they don't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
They may, like Michelangelo's father, just want him to be normal, be a normal Italian young man and do a normal job. And Michelangelo was not normal. He was outstanding, I think it's also, there's something called strength spotting, which is a fun thing to do. We can do this for each other. Instead of, looking at somebody and saying, "Oh, I like your outfit." That is a compliment to the person's clothes. You can say, "I like your outfit. You have such a gift for color and design." Okay. To really acknowledge people's gifts, because our normal society tries to make us feel inferior. So we'll buy a lot of products that we don't need because the advertisements make us feel like we need them in order to be okay. So we can go against that and be subversive and help other people discover their gifts. And it's simple. It's actually kind of a game. There are times when I do this, not only with my clients and my students, but with people I know, and just say, "Yeah, you really have that. That's something special about you." We need to do that for each other.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. I do it a little bit, but I'm going to try to do it a lot more. And it's really interesting that when you do that, you can sometimes see people's eyes widen because they didn't see that in themselves. They take it for granted. I mean, that's one of the things that I realize is that when you're born with a gift, it's very easy to take it for granted because it comes so naturally to you. You almost don't see it. So for somebody else to be able to name it can wake you up to something that's almost invisible to you until that moment. And the other thing I was thinking from what you said is that our culture also wants us to buy products that have us buying the same styles of clothes, the same everything, because we're sort of conditioned to be like everybody else. The truth is if everybody is like everybody else and they're busy trying to suppress their unique abilities, they're easier to control. So, I mean, it's just the sad truth. Being subversive is actually saving your own life. Really, it's allowing you to follow your purpose and be who you were meant to be all along. And it's good that we have these rules that sort of keep us from maybe eating dog food and throwing. But it's only good up to a certain point. We learn to behave, but to learn to conform and squelch our creativity, that's just a crying shame. And so I think that's what this is all about, right?
Yeah. Authoritarian structures and personalities want people to conform so that they can control them.
Yeah.
The advertising world wants us to conform so that we will buy the products and so that they can get paid. And, again, to herd us around like a herd of sheep, not to go back to, Giotto's image, instead of human beings. And what's interesting to me is that authoritarianism is not really effective. It's very efficient, You get everybody marching in the same direction, and in an emergency, for example, if there's a fire, everybody needs to obey orders and do what they're told, the fire crew, so that they can put out the fire. But in a very complex culture like what we have, we need people to think differently, because even a well-meaning person, one person's point of view is not enough to solve the complex problems that we face.
That's
We
right.
need to have people from many perspectives. For example, I can't see behind me. I can only see in front of me, and my peripheral vision to some degree. Someone else can see what's going on behind me, or to this side or to that side, or has a talent that I don't have. And when we put all those talents together, we have a much richer way of solving our problems. We can contribute much more as a democratic group than we can as an authoritarian, one person's point of view controlling group.
Yeah, there's a lot of research too that shows if you bring divergent individuals together with different gifts to solve a problem, they're more likely to solve that problem than if they engage in groupthink. And so that's also kind of brings me to the topic of community. I thought I'd bring this up. I don't know if you know about this research, but I'm going to segue a little bit and see what you think. It's an experiment, Diane. See what you think. There's a recent documentary on Netflix. It's called Join or Die. Have you heard of that?
Nope.
I think you'll find it interesting. It's based on the book Bowling Alone: The Collapse and Revival of American Community by Robert D. Putnam. And basically, what he's found is over the last few decades, we've become increasingly disconnected from our family, our friends, our neighbors, and our social structures. But once upon a time, and another dark time, after World War II, after the Great Depression, people started forming little communities. And they would be, everything from church, PTA, clubs, bowling leagues, didn't matter.
Mhm.
But people started forming these little communities. And that is how they climbed out of those dark times. Now those communities are falling apart. Watching TV, people would just stay at home instead of going out and seeing their friends. Being in small communities where you care about each other and nurture each other's growth can actually thwart authoritarianism. When communities collapse, that's when authoritarian regimes can take root.
Oh, that's horrific. Actually, yes, we've been experiencing great disconnection for decades now. I remember growing up all over the place. My father was in the Air Force. One time we lived in the Midwest, and in a little town in Olathe, Kansas, all of our houses had front porches. So guess what? I could see the neighbors, we'd wave at each other, etc. And then we moved again to other places where there were no front porches, there were backyards, and the garages were out in front. So we did not see our neighbors. Everybody was in their cars. We couldn't walk into town as I could in Olathe, Kansas, or ride my bike and wave to the neighbors. We human beings evolved in groups. We did not evolve in a million people controlled by an authoritarian. There were towns, there were communities. Even in a big city like New York, there are neighborhoods, right? People knew their neighbors. Our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has said that we have an epidemic of loneliness and isolation in this country, and that's as bad as smoking a pack or so of cigarettes a day. It's bad for our health physically and emotionally, because we need to connect. It gives us a sense of belonging, security, being cared for, and having others to care for. And yes, it helps us solve our problems. I had an experience of that a while back where I live in Los Gatos. There was a plan to build this huge bridge from right behind one of my neighbor's houses to get over the creek, because they were building a children's playground off University Avenue. And so they needed to have this big overpass to walk across there. And not to mention, it was going to mess up the property values, but it would also enable people who were walking on the bridge to they have to cut down some of the trees in order to do that. And they could look directly into my neighbor Elaine's bedroom. And she didn't like that idea, and we didn't like that idea. And so, but they said, well, we need this bridge to help the children get to University Avenue to the playground. And a group of us got together. We said, there's got to be a better way. This bridge doesn't make any sense. It's going to cost a lot of money. So we went to the town council. We have a town council on Los Gatos, and said, we found there's a better way. And I remember standing up there and explaining what the better way was. Said, if you build this bridge and the children go to busy University Avenue, it will put them out on a busy street with industrial buildings and no sidewalks, and they'll get hit by cars. This is not good. You know, if the children walk up the side street on the sidewalk, and all you have to do is build a sidewalk on University Avenue for them to walk up to the playground. You don't need to build the bridge. They'll be safer. It'll cost less. It is a lot less, Okay, we put our heads together and we came up with the sidewalk. We unanimously were approved, and we walked out of the meeting high-fiving each other saying we did it. Okay. One of us could not have come up with that solution, but collectively we brainstormed and we came up with it. We came up with something that the Los Gatos town council members could not have perceived by themselves, because we were there on the ground and we saw something they didn't see. So collectively, we can solve our complex problems, or even a simple problem like that, a lot more intelligently than just doing what we're told. We need community. We need to brainstorm. The artists in the Renaissance knew each other. There are lots of stories about people living in Paris, artists together for different time periods, who would collectively brainstorm, share each other's art, et cetera, and get inspired by each other. It's a sense of synergy that we get when we work together. And to be healthy human beings and to create healthy societies, we need that.
Robert Putnam also pointed out that when people were in small communities, they would care for each other, they would help each other out, there would be warm feelings towards each other, and also fewer bad actors because they knew each other and they would know who did it. So when we're, alone at home, looking at social media and watching television and not seeing each other face to face, we don't know each other as well. We don't necessarily behave as well as we would in these small communities.
We trust each other. We
Yes.
need bonds of belonging and trust.
Yeah.
And, I trust my neighbors because I know who they are. In big cities where there's an anonymity, and on social media where people really don't know each other in person, but they just are, dealing with these little avatars, et cetera. It's easy to be on our bad behavior because we don't really feel connected. There are things that people say on social media they would never say to some neighbor that they know, or a friend or a colleague. They just would not do it face to face. And people will not rip off their neighbors because they'll be ostracized. In a small town, everybody knows each other's business. And there's not as much crime because, everybody would know about it.
Yeah, and there's less polarity and division as well because you're more likely to help a neighbor that you know. It solves a lot of problems. And I think it also circles back to, at the very beginning, talking about how we discover our gifts, because I think when you have a sense of belonging and you can relax, you're more likely to trust yourself and your inner direction. I think a lot of people are, because as you said, there's a loneliness epidemic. And when people are stressed out, they look outside of themselves for certainty instead of inside. I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yep, of course. And the advertisers and those who wish to control us politically want to keep us from connecting. I was doing research and going back to consult with the National Endowment for the Humanities. At one point, went to the National Archives and saw the Declaration of Independence. And I counted, and there were only 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence who signed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to something that had never been done before,
Mm.
to something that they had never done before. But it was an ideal that they embraced mutually.
Mhm.
And as Ben Franklin said, we have to hang together here, or for sure we'll hang separately. They would have been hanged as traitors to the King of England, King George III. This was, courage that they got from working together, trust that they developed. It helped them all believe in their dream of a democracy. And I'm glad they did. But 56 people isn't very many. Again, it's a small community. And they didn't agree on everything. There were big debates about the Constitution, when they set that up. But they finally they did resolve it and they came together. That's what we need to do. In fact, I believe that our vision of democracy emerged directly from the Renaissance, when people trusted their personal inspiration, when they realized that collectively, we, the people, have something very valuable and that the power is within each one of us. In the 17th century, John Milton, who also wrote Paradise Lost, wrote something called The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, saying for the first time that kings ruled with the consent of the people, and that a good king was supposed to take care of the people and not do everything for himself. And that later influenced John Locke, who came up with the social contract, which then came up with our ideal that together, collectively, we, the people, can form our own more perfect union, whether it's in the neighborhood solving a problem or in a larger sense. I think we all need to get involved in working together to help solve our problems instead of sitting and feeling a sense of learned helplessness. Isolation makes us helpless, community gives us strength.
Thank you so much, Diane, for those inspiring words. Being in community is a great way to identify and nurture your gifts, even if you don't know what they are. It can give you a sense of meaning and purpose, too. I noticed in my creativity workshops and my group coaching practice that after one person would make a breakthrough, the other students and clients would too, kind of like popcorn, one kernel pops and then another, and then a bunch of them pop. I think it's because when people share their experiences and perspectives, it helps others to open up and feel safe and find the courage to be their true selves. I wanted to circle back to the beginning of the podcast when I talked about Michael Meade. We are living in a world that's overwhelming and full of uncertainty right now. There's no two ways about it. There's no getting around it. But the good news is that death, rebirth, moments like these are the perfect time to find your true calling. Isn't that crazy? It's because everything around you is breaking down. And that opens up space for you to explore parts of yourself that you may have forgotten about when you tried to fit in. In the first part, we talked about finding your gifts by listening to the quiet voice inside of you instead of the people outside of you telling you who you should be. No one knows better than you. Your gifts are there just waiting for you to reclaim them. And in the second part, Diane and I talked about the importance of being in a community that sees you. So take a class, do volunteer work, join a book club. It really doesn't matter what it is that you do. Just find people that you have the same interests with and do something with them. I joined a ukulele group about 1.5 years ago, and it makes me feel so happy and such a sense of belonging that I trust myself more when I make decisions about what I want to do with my life. And also, think about exploring a hobby. We talked about doing a creative outlet at the beginning of this podcast, and we also talked a lot about painting. It doesn't have to be the arts. It can be in anything that makes you come alive. Cooking, yoga, playing hockey, it'll help you to find an inner compass to guide you and a sense of belonging to support you as you change. I just wanted to thank Diane so much for being on this podcast. I've included a link to her wonderful website and wonderful books for you to learn more about her. Thank you so much, Diane. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you for listening to Your True Calling. Please leave a review and share it with your friends. From my website, yourtruecalling.org, you can follow me on social media, learn more about my music and my coaching, contact me to find your superpowers live on the air, and help me produce future episodes by funding me on Patreon.